All right, thank you for joining us for today's event on Low Biller, Probe, and Educate. My name is Mary Sue Gardner. I'm a registered nurse on the Provider Outreach and Education team, and I'm going to be your facilitator for today's event. And you also heard me mention my coworker, Jennifer, who is the other clinician on the Provider Outreach and Education team. So she is my co-host. She is helping with the Q&A session, or the Q&A in the chat. And she will also be helping if I have any technical issues happening in the background. She's there for me. I'm also joined by members of our medical review department as well, who are just on standby if we were to have any information or any questions about the process itself. So my objective for today is to discuss the certain Part A services that we are starting to review in this review process for our low billing providers. We're going to accomplish this today by going through some background information on the low biller, probe, and educate process. We're going to talk about the Part A services that are subject to this process. And we are going to talk about compliance with the probe and educate process. Just to draw your attention to one other thing, we do usually at this time give you disclaimers about our event. Our disclaimers are loaded into this event at the end of this presentation for you to read on your own. So please make sure if there's any kind of information that appears at the bottom of your screen, you pay attention to those things. All right, some background on the program. Let's kick things off today with a little background information on this process and why we started reviewing low billing providers, specifically in Part A inpatient services. So let's give some history on it. Back in around 2017, CMS implemented the targeted probe and educate process. Now, the program targets items or services that have high national error rates and pose a financial risk to the Medicare program. But identifying and reviewing those suppliers and those providers is up to the MAC to show what providers, what services do you have that are paying and processing through your system as a MAC, and who are those providers that are posing the most risk in those services. And that's how we do our general targeted probe and educate process. We want to look for those services that pose the highest risk. And then of those services, we're looking for those providers that may produce billing errors that pose the highest risk in those. Then we, again, we identify those, we complete medical review to make sure that providers are following their rules. If they are, they're released from targeted probe and educate. And if they're not, they may go on to additional services. So because the targeted probe and educate focuses on those services that are most likely to be in error and those providers that are most likely to cause the errors, most providers never get chosen for targeted probe and educate. So what that means is a lot of providers will never see a medical review request for us for a targeted process. Because of that, CMS wanted to ensure there was still compliance going on for providers who were not high billers. So they implemented a low biller probe and educate program. So CMS observed really positive results from that pilot program. And then they decided to expand this process as an option for all MACs. So this process was adopted by us as WPS, and it will target providers or suppliers that aren't easily captured under the traditional targeted probe and educate process due to those low claim billers, those low claim volumes. So let's move on and talk about the reviews themselves. So I already said this is for providers that don't bill as much to Medicare, but they do still bill for services that have a potential to be aberrant. More specifically, providers or suppliers who bill for the services that we selected, which we're going to talk about in a little bit as well, but they bill less than 19 claims for that service in a 3-month period of time. So to make sure we're capturing claims, we're going to be looking at providers who bill more than 5 claims, but less than 20 claims, so that 19 range mark in a 3-month period. And providers who bill more than 19 claims for a selected service in that 3-month period, those providers, they're actually eligible for the regular TPE process. So we're not going to touch 20+ claim billing providers. So we have selected 2 DRGs. So these are Part A inpatient services in an IPPS hospital. So the DRGs listed on the screen for you, the 056, which is the Degenerative Nervous System Disorders with major complications and comorbidities, and the DRG 5057, which is the nervous system disorders without the MCCs. So each of the Medicare severity group related diagnosis groups, gosh, that's a handful, MSDRGs. It's defined by a particular set of patient attributes, which include things like the principal diagnoses, the secondary diagnoses, procedures, sex, and even discharge status goes into an MSDRG. So there's a section of the Social Security Act, and it's 1886 D of the Social Security Act, and that actually sets forth a system of payment for the operating costs of acute care hospital inpatient stays under Medicare Part A, based on prospectively set rates. So this payment system is referred to as IPPS, or Inpatient Prospective Payment System. Under the IPPS, each case is categorized into a diagnosis-related group, or a DRG. And then each DRG has a payment weight assigned to it based on the average resources to treat the Medicare payment or patients in that DRG. Major complications or comorbidities, and those actually help describe the severity of any kind of secondary diagnoses in that inpatient prospective payment system as well. So again, for these reviews, we're going to be reviewing low billing providers that bill these 2 DRGs, DRG 056 and DRG 057. And remember, one's with and one's without those major complications and comorbidities. So degenerative nervous system disorders without major complications or comorbidities, these are disorders that include, but is not limited to, things like Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, amyotrophic lateral sclerosis, Huntington's disease, multiple sclerosis. Major complications and comorbidities could include things, but it's not limited to, things like autonomic dysfunctions, dysphagia, falls, congenitive decline, dementia, even cardiovascular disease and infections are sometimes included in those complications and comorbidities. So why do we choose these DRGs? We chose them because the search contractor, which is the comprehensive error rate testing contractor, they had previously done reviews that included these DRGs specifically. And they actually identified a national paid claim error rate for DRG 057 of 16% for incorrect billing that DRG. Now, again, we expanded it to include the 056 as well, so with the major complications of comorbidities. Incorrect coding could be because of incorrect diagnoses or miscoding procedures, or sometimes it's lack of supporting documentation to, even support the major complications and comorbidities even existed. So now that we've talked about what we're doing and why we're doing it, let's talk about how we're going to do it. So these reviews will be on a prepayment basis. That means before Medicare pays you, the claim's going to halt in the processing and it's going to suspend for medical review. So for those of you who are billers, the claim actually moves into different status locations in your system. So you can watch it as you watch your normal billing to make sure things go to the payment floor. It first hits a status location of SB 6000. Then the very next day, it moves into SB 6001. This is where the ADR letter actually generates, which says, hey, this claim has suspended for review, and here's the information that we want for this specific service for this specific patient. So it's going to remain in that pending status until the documentation is received by us. Then we're going to manually move it into a status location of SMR DOC or SMR doc. If it's not received by us from you in the 45-day time frame that we've given you to submit it, then that claim is automatically going to move into a denied status for no documentation. It'll be a no documentation received denial. So again, if you're in the billing and coding world, you'll probably recognize this as a 56900 denial. And it's a really silly reason to get a denial because we're going to move in and talk about the probe and educate process, and we make an effort to get a hold of you and let you know that you are under this process. So let's talk about this process a little more. The low biller probe and educate process pretty much works the same way as the targeted probe and educate process, or TPE process. So if you're selected, we're going to notify you. We try to get in contact with you over the phone. But we also send a letter. This letter does contain the contact information for the nurse that's in charge of your review. So make sure you're not ignoring this. Make sure you take the phone call if we try to reach out to you. You need to make sure your facility has processes in place that if we reach out, you guys know who to forward the call to. So another tip is to review your medical review information on your enrollment information forms and make sure that is up to date if it needs to be. You should, again, have plans in place about who your point of contact should be if someone decides, any government entity, for that fact, decides that they want to do medical review of your documentation. So once we've made contact and sent you a letter, or sent you a letter if we couldn't get in contact with someone via phone, then we're going to notify, or you'll know that your reviews are going to start and that your edit is going to be turned on in the system. So claims that hit the billing criteria for the process, they're going to suspend. An ADR is going to generate, and then you will respond by sending in your documentation as directed. You should have someone watching, again, your claim status. It's so important. If we get your documentation and make a review determination, if we deny a claim for some reason, we will send it on to processing to the payment floor, and it will have a denial reason code associated with it. Remember, if you want to appeal the decision, you only have 120 days from the date of that denial to do so. So don't wait until all your reviews are done, because you could potentially miss your time frame for appeal. So if your claim is found to be compliant and passes the review, then again, it's just going to move on to the payment flow. So once you get to the end of your reviews, if your overall claims are found to be more compliant than non-compliant, meaning by the time we review all of those claims, you have a passing error rate, then you're just going to be released for any additional reviews. If you're found to be non-compliant, meaning your error rate doesn't pass, you're going to be educated on your findings. And after the education, we're going to move you to additional rounds of review. If you don't pass after 3 rounds of review, we will refer you back to CMS for the next steps, which could include a referral to the UPIC for potential fraud, waste, and abuse. So we never want to do that. So the point to remember in this case is always take our phone call. If someone calls and says, hey, this is so-and-so from, WPS, Government Health Services, we want to talk to someone about some upcoming medical review, take the phone call. I highly encourage you to do that. All right. Now that we've discussed how the review is going to work, let's move on to what documentation you would need to submit if you are selected and we request review. When it comes to the documentation of an inpatient record and really the information to support a DRG that's under review, it's really best to submit your entire chart. Because we're looking at everything to verify that that DRG is correct. And if there are any major complications and comorbidities, that they are captured in your documentation as well. So let's quickly just review these components that you would want to make sure you are submitting. So starting with your admission records, any emergency room records, if those are applicable. When it comes to the physician-specific information, this includes information that's not limited to, but your physician orders, physician progress notes, history and physical, which a lot of times that's where we find the diagnosis and the MCCs. Your physician consultations, proof of intent to order inpatient services. So if we don't see an actual order for inpatient services, we're going to look for in the physician's progress notes probably to see the intent that that's truly where the physician wanted the patient to go. But remember, if you're admitting, get a physician order. Make sure it is on file and make sure you submit it if we request. Okay, moving on. Operative reports, radiology reports, laboratory reports. When it comes to nursing notes, any kind of treatment records, and really anything the nurse documents on. Continuing on, principal diagnosis of some sort of degenerative nervous system disorder. So we need to see the documented diagnoses made by that physician. Again, this will probably be in the physician's history, physical of the patient, progress notes, etc., but it has to be in your chart. Proof of major complications or comorbidities, especially if you're billing the DRG 056, any kind of diagnostic reports, documentation of indicators that were present on admission, and then discharge summaries and discharge reports. Because again, we have to compare where your discharge codes were indicated when you billed, and we compare that to, does that meet up to where you said the patient was going to go when they left your facility? All right. And then on this last slide is just a list of, a bunch of resources that are really good for you to know. I'm going to take you out to our website and show you some of these resources. And as my computer is opening, give me just a second. Okay, so this is information under our medical review department section of our website. And if I were to go back to just our homepage, up here we have a topic center. And in that topic center, medical review has their own section. So there's some highlighted information here. And then there's more specific information that falls out under here. There's information about the targeted probe and educate processes that are going on. And there are other TPEs on DRG validation. So I'm going to pull that up because just because you're a low billing provider doesn't mean that the information itself isn't still the same for validating those DRGs. So we send you right out here to the targeted probe and educate information on DRG validation. And it gives you the background history, it gives you the scope of the reviews, and then all of that information that we just went through in the documentation is listed here as well as giving you additional resources that we feel are good to know. If we, staying here and going back one, again, finding out information about the targeted probe and educate review process as a whole. Because remember, the low biller probe and educate process is going to run the same as the targeted probe and educate process. So we went through this information, but again, good information for you guys to know and what you're looking for. Now, I'll just use the back button and go back out to medical review. I said at the beginning of this that this review is specific to Medicare Part A. Specifically in the J5, I believe this is a J5 only issue right now. But that doesn't mean that it won't be expanded to J8 if we have success in these reviews and we decide we need to start looking at providers in that area of business as well. But the thing that's important to remember here, make sure you are on the correct section of the website, because if you are on a Part B section of our website, you're not going to find information about any kind of DRG reviews under there because it doesn't exist in Part B. So make sure that wherever you are providing services, whether that is facility-based or clinic-based, that you are looking at the correct side of our website. Now, what other resources? Oh, responding to the additional documentation requests. Another good resource for you guys to be aware of, because you should have a plan in place prior to your probe and educate review starting of how you are going to respond to a documentation request. Are you going to use the portal? Will you be sending it by mail, etc.? The best way to submit documentation is to respond to that additional documentation request using the Secure Net Access portal or SNAP, or the easiest way to say it is the portal. So we have information here about how you submit through the portal, but one last piece of information I want to show you is our portal user manual. And so if you have access to submit and look at information in our portal in SNAP, I highly encourage you to review this manual or this guide. It's going to walk you through where you can find review decisions, how you can submit your documentation, etc. So lots of useful information. And maybe you are a Part A facility that gets chosen for those DRGs, but maybe some of the prior authorization processes still relate to you because you also perform these services at your facility. So, you know, if you do, go out and read the portal manual about this. And again, it walks you through how to submit your request. It gives you examples of what it looks like in the portal. I cannot pull up the portal because I don't have access, and I would be disclosing protected health information, which would be a big no-no on my part. All right, so as we move back out, and again, using the portal to submit information, I've given you that link as well. I am going to look over and see if there's any questions and answers, because we actually are getting done a little bit early today. And I am not seeing anything that has come into the chat, but there's still time. If you have questions, go ahead and place those into the chat and send those questions to all panelists. But in the interest of time, I'll just continue to move on. And if we get done early, I give you some time back in your day. All right, so in a little bit, at about 1:45, you are going to get an email, and that email is going to have your certificate of attendance in it. So it will have contact hour information if you logged into this webinar. And if you did not log in, if you only joined by phone or mobile device, you're not going to get the email, but I'll give you some information on that as well. But it also is going to give you a link to take our survey. And it's just one way that you can take our survey. The other way is to use the link that Jennifer just put into the chat. So you can just copy and paste that out of the chat, or just even click on it. And depending on the capabilities of your system, it should be hyperlinked for you. Or when I close the webinar, or when you close out of the webinar, you're going to see a page pop up that looks like this. It is WebEx's way of saying, hey, we're sending you to an external site. That external site is a CMS Qualtrics survey. So it'll say CMS Max, it'll say Qualtrics in here. It's not spam. We just wanted to make you aware of it. And it's going to give you the opportunity to take the survey. Now, the unique things about our surveys is, A, if you take them on before, great, thank you, but know that CMS has revamped the survey. So it is shorter, which is great. So it's your opportunity to say, hey, this was helpful and informative. And here's things that I want in the future. Here's other types of education that I, as a provider, would like to see in the future for Medicare, for WPS, government health services to provide. So again, tell us the good, the bad, the ugly, and then tell us what else you want, because we take all those suggestions very seriously and use them to develop upcoming education. So finally, if you think of any questions after this event, you can email those questions to us, and Jennifer's going to put the email address back into the chat one more time and send those within the next week. That email address is also in the slide deck in the notes section. So we ask that you please don't send any kind of PHI or PII. If you have questions that are specific to a claim, you really need to call customer service with those questions, because we don't have access to those claims processing programs. So remember, again, check the notes section of the slide deck for any additional information that we want you to know. So I'm going to check the chat one more time. I'm not seeing anything. So on behalf of Jennifer and myself, as well as our medical review department, we want to thank you for your participation in today's event. Giving you back a few minutes back into your day. Hopefully you can enjoy some coffee and a little bit of food if you haven't eaten lunch yet. So this concludes our webinar, and you can now disconnect.